The Author's Shelf.
The Author's Shelf.
The Author's Shelf. The Author's Shelf. It's about books and stuff.
Good afternoon, I'm Georgie Donaghy and welcome to The Author's Shelf. You can tune into today's show via 2ssr.com.au and by clicking on the Listen to 2SSR Live online tab or via the TuneIn app on your mobile device. Today I'll be chatting with children's and YA author Belinda Murrell. Belinda's the author of The River Charm, The Locket of Dreams, The Ruby Talisman, The Ivory Rose, The Sun Sword Trilogy, The Forgotten Pearl, and more recently the Lulu Bell series. I'll also announce the winners of our Nick Fork and Tony Flowers giveaway, and I'll tell you how you can enter the draw for today's giveaway. If you'd like to interact with us during the show, you can send us a message via our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Author's Shelf, or you can tweet us at The Author's Shelf. Or after the show, I'd love to hear from you too. Now it's time to sit back and relax as I bring you the stories beyond the page. You're listening to The Author's Shelf on 2SSR 99.7 FM, Sound of the Sutherland Shire. Coming up next, Belinda Murrell. Welcome back. It's time to introduce today's guest. Now, Belinda Murrell was born from the literary elite. Her sister Kate Forsyth is a major influence in the Australian literary world and a recent guest on The Author's Shelf. Her brother, Nick Humphrey, is an accomplished author within his own right. But Belinda's literary history dates back 180 years. Her great-great-great-grandfather, James Atkinson, was published on Australia in 1826, while his wife Charlotte published the first Australian children's book, A Mother's Offering to Her Children, in 1841. Belinda's own journey began after finishing university, and over the past 20 years, she's sharpened her pencil as a travel journalist, technical writer and editor. Belinda was a TAFE teacher and public relations consultant, with the latter seeing her successfully run her own award-winning public relations consultancy for 11 years. As if all those professions aren't enough for three people in one lifetime, Belinda has also worked as a grape picker, a stable girl, a waitress in a ski resort and a veterinary nurse. After having her three beautiful children, Belinda's passion for children's literature reignited. Using the tools she acquired while studying children's literature at Macquarie University, Belinda's ability to create stories for her children felt as comfortable as slipping into a favourite pair of old slippers. Her work's been shortlisted in the Koala and Yabra Awards for the last 4 years, 2011 to 2014. She's won an honour book in the 2013 Koala Books and has received CBCA Notable Book in 2012. Her work has also received a highly commended in the Prime Minister's Literary Awards, Premier's Reading Challenge, and the accolades go on and on. Belinda's books, all 22 of them, are as colourful as she is. Here to tell us more about her extraordinary life is Belinda Murrell. Welcome to The Author's Shelf.
Thank you.
Now, Belinda, I always begin by asking my guests, what is their story? So please tell us, what is the Belinda Murrell story?
Well, first of all, I'm a mother. I have three beautiful children, Nick, Emily and Lockie, who are all teenagers now and in high school. I'm happily married. I live in a beautiful big old house overlooking the sea with lots of animals. We have a 14-week-old puppy called Rosie, who's wild and wicked. We have a python who sometimes escapes and loves curling up in people's sleeves. And I even have my own horse called Nutmeg, who lives on my brother's farm. And, of course, I'm a children's author, so I've just finished writing my 22nd book, which is so exciting because they're published internationally. As you said, I've been shortlisted for lots and lots of awards, so it's all very exciting. Absolutely love being a children's writer, and I'm also involved in lots of children's charities like Room to Read and Books in Home, so I'm absolutely passionate about children's books and about children's literacy and all sorts of other things as well. Travelling the world, horse riding, skiing, etc. So that's me.
And I'm glad you didn't bring the python in today.
Yes.
I think I did say that on Facebook. Don't bring that one in with you. Because it got out the other day, didn't it?
It did get out the other day, and I found it curled up in my son's blazer, actually in the sleeve. He loves sleeves for some reason.
Okay. All right. I hope you haven't got him stuck up your sleeve there. All right, Belinda, I've interviewed you last year for Creative Kids Tales, and you were launching a staggering 5 books last year. That's huge. How do you do it?
Lots of juggling and not enough sleep. It is very, very busy because as well as writing the books, you've got to do all the other things involved with being an author, which is things like lots of school visits, touring, literary festivals, bookstore events, all sorts of things. So I think this year I've been away for about 8 weeks touring. I've been to Melbourne, Brisbane, Canberra, Sydney, lots of school visits here and regional New South Wales, as well as trying to fit in my deadline. So I'm actually running very late on my latest book that I'm working on.
But your publishers will forgive you for that.
I think they have. I hope so.
That's good. That's good. All right. Tell us, how old were you when you started writing?
I was about 8 years old. So I started writing poems and plays and stories and novels that I used to write in exercise books that I used to illustrate by hand. And I think even back then I had ideas of, world domination publishing, because we used to pretend to self-publish and have, published in London, New York, Rome and Sydney. So yes, I've been writing ever since I was about 8 years old.
And why do you think you wanted to be a writer?
I think back then I just loved writing. I didn't think of it as a job back then. I just always loved writing. I was passionate about it. It wasn't until I was about 16 and I was trying to think about what I was going to do at university. And I actually wanted to do vet science. But a lot of my teachers started encouraging me to think about doing writing as a career. And so I'm really glad that I followed their advice.
Do you have a favourite story that you wrote as a child?
I think most of my early stories were very heavily influenced by my favourite writer at that time. When I was about 8 was Enid Blyton. So they were all mysteries and adventures and very much influenced by Enid Blyton, and then other writers as I grew up, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and all my other favourite writers.
All right, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a second with more from Belinda. All right, Belinda, welcome back. Can you please tell us about your literary heritage?
Well, I come from quite an unusual family because I do come from a family of writers. My sister is Kate Forsyth, of course, and she's also a best-selling internationally published author, and she's written something like 35 books published all around the world. And my brother, Nick Humphrey, is also a writer, but he's a lawyer, so his books are about things like venture capital and tax, but he's hugely successful as well. And our heritage goes back nearly 200 years. So my great-great-great-great-grandfather, James Atkinson, wrote one of the very first books about Australia. His first book was written in 1826, and he did write lots of books and lots of journals. And his wife was Charlotte Atkinson, who wrote the very first children's book ever published in Australia. Their daughter Louisa was the first Australian-born female journalist and the first Australian-born female novelist. And there's been lots and lots and lots of other writers in my family ever since.
Now, Belinda, you said, Kate actually said that it was something that your family always talked about when you were growing up, writing from such a young age. How did you feel knowing you had that special tie in Australian literary history? Oh, because it was just...
It's just something we always seem to know. So we often used to go and spend the school holidays with my grandparents, and my grandmother was an English teacher and she loved telling stories. She used to tell us these wonderful stories all the time. And one of my favourite stories was actually about the Atkinson family, who were the family of writers. And sometimes we'd go down and visit the old estate that they built back in the 1820s. And in those days it was all derelict and falling down. And Kate and I would peer through the hedges and look at this beautiful old house, and we'd try and imagine the family that lived there and what they did. And my grandmother had a collection of a lot of the old books that were written back in the 19th century, and she actually left them to me when she died. So it was something that we, did talk about, and I think Kate and I romanticised it. So we sort of imagined that they were like the colonial Bronte family. And I think Kate and I had this sort of little dream that maybe one day we could grow up and be modern day Bronte sisters writing wonderful books that would change the world.
Well, you've both done just that. Tell us about The Sequin Star. That's one of the books we're going to give away later in the show, but tell us about The Sequin Star.
Oh, The Sequin Star is my latest book in my Time Slip series, and I had so much fun researching and writing this book because it's set in a circus during the 1930s in the Great Depression. And so my daughter and I went and visited lots of circuses, and we actually went and interviewed some amazing circus performers, which was fabulous. My daughter loved, she was my PA, she told me. So we did it together. It was great. And so The Sequin Star is a story of a modern day girl called Claire, and she finds this old chipped and battered brooch amongst her grandparents' treasures. And this brooch hurtles her back to the past. She wakes up in a circus camp, and it's 1932, the middle of the Great Depression, and she's rescued by some circus performers, Princess Rosina, who's a bareback dancer extraordinaire, and her friend Jem, who's a circus roustabout. And there's also another young man called Kit, who comes to the circus night after night to watch Rosina perform. So it's a real circus adventure and a bit of a family secrets and a bit of a mystery. So it's a great book to write.
I love the cover of the book and the brooch on the top.
Oh, cover's gorgeous, isn't it? I love it.
It's absolutely, it's just eye-catching. It's lovely. And I love, the character, the hairstyle and everything that fits in with that time. All right. Now, we've heard about the sequin star. How much influence does your family have on your writing?
I would say a huge amount. First of all, my kids are my greatest inspiration. So all my books that I have written, I've written very much for my own children, particularly my daughter Emily, particularly my Time Slip series. But my kids always read my books. They give me lots of ideas. They always pop up at dinner and they'll say, "Oh, Mum, have you ever thought about this?" Or "What about writing a book about that?" So they're a great inspiration. And every time I write a book, my husband Rob and my daughter Emily always read it before my publisher does, because they're my first readers. And when they read it and say, "Oh yes, I love it," then I feel confident enough to send it to my publisher. And then my wider family, of course, my mum encouraged me to write from the time I was tiny. A huge influence. My dad's always up for telling me funny stories about being a vet, and my sister, of course, and my brother as writers. It's just fantastic. It's like our own little writers group. So Kate and I see a lot of each other. We'll walk along the beach. We'll talk about our books, our writing. We'll talk about plot problems we're having and try and help each other out, or just chat about our writing. It's really great to have that support.
That's nice to be able to bounce that back off your sister. That's excellent. Now, all right, tell me, when your husband reads your books, how many pots and pans go flying across the kitchen if he doesn't like something?
No, he's fantastic. I really, really trust his judgment. So a couple of times he has said, "Oh, not sure if that's working," or "I don't really understand what you're trying to get at here." And so I always take that on board. A couple of times I've got a bit tetchy, but really that's because I haven't had enough sleep, because I've been up till 2 a.m. trying to get it finished. But no, he's fantastic. So I love him reading my books, and I really trust his judgment.
Oh, that's nice. That's excellent. How did you celebrate your first publishing contract?
Lots of French champagne. It was great.
Similar taste to your sister, I see.
Oh, absolutely. I got the call. I was jumping up and down and screaming. I was so excited, and I quickly rang my husband. I rang my mum. I rang my sister, and my sister said, "Get over here now." And it was a school night, and I said, "Oh, but the homework and the this and the that." And she said, "Get over here now. I'm popping the champagne now." So we drank lots of champagne. It was great.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right. Now, when I interviewed Kate earlier this year, she said to ask you the story behind your book, The River Charm.
Oh, The River Charm's a really special book to me, because this is a book that I wrote last year. It's an historical book, and it was very much inspired by my ancestors, the writing family. And I told you that my grandmother used to tell us stories. That was one of my favourite stories that she told us. And it was very romantic and very sad. And I started doing all this research, as Kate did, because it was the 170-year anniversary of the first children's book being published. And people would ask us to come and speak at dinners and speak at schools. And we started doing all this research, and it was absolutely fascinating. So I decided I wanted to write a book about the family. So yes, it's the story of Charlotte Atkinson growing up, and they were one of the wealthiest and most successful families in the colony. Wonderful life in this beautiful estate of Albury until James Atkinson died, and his wife Charlotte was left a rich young widow who of course was a tempting target. So the convicts began to rebel, the bushrangers began to attack over and over again, and at last, really in fear for her life, she married her overseer, which was a terrible mistake, because things went from bad to worse, and he turned out to be a violent alcoholic madman. And I'm not exaggerating, because he actually did murder one of his workers in a fit of rage later in life, and was jailed for manslaughter. So in fear for their lives, Charlotte had to flee with her 4 young children on horseback to a remote hut in the wilderness. And that was the beginning of when she wrote her first children's book, because she was desperately poor, trying to feed her children and live on her own in those days when, it was a very patriarchal society. So I was just so intrigued by the bravery and courage of this woman, and everything this family went through, and that it was all real. It's the old story of, its truth is often stranger than fiction.
That's amazing, amazing story. You're listening to The Author's Shelf on 2SR. I have Belinda Murrell in the studio with me. Belinda, tell us about the Sunsword trilogy.
The Sunsword Heart Trilogy was my very first series. So I was inspired to write this because my three kids, when they were younger, were just like me, very voracious readers, and they were reading well above their year level. And I was struggling a bit to find books that they were really, really keen on reading. And my sister was a published author at that time writing for adults. And I said to her, Kate, why are you writing for adults? You should be writing books for kids. And she turned around and looked at me and she said, well, why don't you write some books for kids? And I thought, wow, okay, I'll give it a go. So I was inspired to write this series for my children and put in it all the things that they loved about books. So it's a fantasy adventure series with codes and puzzles, bows and arrows, sword fights, and of course, a dangerous quest. And so that was a 3-book series, and it did really well, was published internationally, and it launched my career. So the Sun Sword.
I'm glad Kate convinced you to put pen to paper. All right. Now, we chatted a little bit off air about Lulu Bell. Tell us, who is Lulu Bell?
Well, Lulu Bell is my new series. It's for readers aged about 6 to 9. It's a junior illustrated series. And Lulu is a girl growing up in a vet hospital. So she's about 8 years old. Her dad's a vet. Her mum's an artist. And Lulu's really practical. She's very good at solving problems. She's a little bit bossy, but she's really kind. And she's just a great character. I really love her. She's got a younger sister called Rosie, who's dreamy and creative and loves wearing angel wings, and a little brother called Gus, who's 3, who's cheeky, naughty, mischievous, and also a superhero called Bug Boy. So it's a series about family, friends, and animal adventures.
Now, how many are in the series?
There are 8 books out now, but I've got book 9 coming out in November for Christmas, and I've just finished writing book 10. So there'll be about 13 or 14 books in the series that I'm working on this year.
And we're actually giving one of the Lulu Bell books away, so listen out for that a little bit later on. Did Lulu Bell obviously has come from your experiences growing up?
Absolutely. So I grew up, my dad was a vet. So when I was about 8 years old, we lived in the vet hospital. We had a big old house and we had the vet hospital in the front of it and we lived in the back of it. And so, of course, I had the most amazing childhood. We had lots and lots and lots of animals. We always had really interesting pets, always about 4 dogs, 4 cats, but also interesting things like piglets and ducklings and orphan lambs and a pony in the back garden and pythons and little baby possums. We even had a little wallaby called Christabel that used to jump around the back garden and live in a sack on the back of the kitchen door. So we always had lots of animal adventures in my house.
Oh, that sounds like every young girl's dream.
Absolutely.
That many animals roaming around the house. All right, tell us, what's the best thing about being an author?
I love the writing. I love the research. But I must say what I absolutely love is seeing what the books can do out there in the world. So I get hundreds of letters from kids all around Australia and overseas telling me how much they love the books, which is fantastic. But I also get lots of letters from sometimes teachers or parents or grandparents. And sometimes they tell me that the books have had this amazing impact on a child's life. It might be that they're a reluctant reader and they've never really enjoyed reading, and suddenly one of my books has switched them on and they've become a book lover. Or it could be that they're having some sort of trouble in their life. It might be friendship issues or something going on. And somehow the books manage to help them deal with that and maybe find some courage within themselves to deal with their lives. So it's just amazing to think that you actually can have this impact on children's lives and change people's lives. It's such a humbling and amazing feeling to know that your books are doing that in the world.
Helping children to read and seeing smiles on faces. That's very, very rewarding. Okay. Thanks for joining me this afternoon on the Author's Shelf. All right. I have given you a little bit of time to think about this one. What's one word that sums you up?
I have to say passionate. Passionate about books, passionate about kids' literacy, passionate about kids.
I have to agree with that one. Sitting here listening to you speak, yes. Okay, all right. That one fits you perfectly. Good work on that one. All right. Now, what's the best writing tip that you've ever been given?
Turn off the TV. Someone said that to me when I started out writing, and I have to say that for years I didn't watch TV because I used to write at night time when my kids were asleep because I was working as a freelance journalist during the day. So yes, turn off those distractions and steal time to write.
I think it's now turn off Facebook.
Exactly. I think you're right there too.
All right. Tell us all about The Forgotten Pearl.
The Forgotten Pearl is a book I wrote a couple of years ago. It's an historical book, and I was inspired to write this because a few years ago my family and I decided to run away.
So we went travelling for 2 years with our kids when they were about 6, 8 and 10. And we ended up going over to Europe for about 5 months and travelling around there, where I managed to research the Ruby Talisman and the Locket of Dreams. And then we came back to Australia and we travelled around Australia for about 18 months in a caravan and a 4-wheel drive, having all sorts of amazing adventures. And we ended up in the top end of Australia. And while we were up there, we spent quite a few weeks up around Darwin, and I was just completely blown away by the history of the top end, particularly during the Second World War. My husband's a bit of a Second World War history buff, and so we went to visit all these sites, but we also chatted to all these people, and there was all these stories that were coming out about what everyday people lived through and experienced during the Second World War. And so because I was homeschooling my children, I homeschooled them for 2 years, I wanted to try and find some books that would sort of tell them a little bit about this Australian history of the Second World War, and I couldn't really find anything. So then I thought, well, I'm going to have to write them a book, of course. And so that's how I came up with the idea for The Forgotten Pearl. So it's about a girl called Poppy who's growing up in Darwin. She lives with her family in Darwin during the war, and they get caught up. Of course, it's a very sleepy, idyllic place until Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And suddenly it goes from being a sleepy little backwater to being a war zone, and Poppy and her family are caught up in it. So it's sort of woven in lots of true little anecdotes and stories that I heard on my travels, and lots of interesting things like that. So the Forgotten Pearl was a great book to research, and that was a book that actually won the honour book in the Koala Awards last year, and kids just keep writing to me saying it's one of their favourite books ever. So it's great to see that it's done so well.
And obviously your kids love it.
Absolutely. In fact, my son was as proud as punch because when he was in year 6, his class was studying it as their class novel. So then his mum had to come in and explain where I got the inspiration from it. And all his friends read it, and they were just they all loved it. So Lockie was so thrilled.
Oh, that's excellent. And there's a lot of historical content in that novel as well?
Yes, so it's all about obviously the bombing of Darwin and the evacuation of the population and all the things that went on there. So it's Poppy growing up with her family, and all her brothers and sisters are involved in the war in different ways. So her brother goes off and he's taken a prisoner of war in Singapore. Her sister's working as a nurse in a hospital on the front line. And so it's just that their letters back and forward, but also the adventures that Poppy herself has as a 14-year-old girl. Everything from, her mum having to make her clothes when she grows, having to make her clothes out of tablecloths because you can't buy clothes, and to the rationing, to just what life was like then, and also, of course, this terrifying bombing of Darwin and the evacuation. So that was the crux behind the story.
Excellent. All right. Now, what advice do you have for those who are starting their journey to publication?
Oh, it's a long road. So patience and perseverance, I guess. No, I think the main thing is, as a writer, you just have to practice. You have to write. And so I think, I started writing when I was 8 years old, and I've been writing virtually every day since then. And I think it just takes years and years and years to learn your craft. And once you're a really good writer, it takes a long, long time to get published as well. So patience.
Now, you mentioned turning off the TV.
Yes.
Apart from turning off the TV and now turning off Facebook, what's your set writing routine?
Well, I have 3 children who are all in high school, so I get up in the morning and I get my kids off to school, and then I tend to sort of go in my PJs into my office and sit there and go through my emails. Then I'll take the dog for a walk along the beach just to clear my head, come back, make a coffee, and then I start writing. So I try and write every day if I'm not off on tour or I'm doing lots of school visits, because I find that I can't write when I'm doing that kind of traveling. I'm too tired and my brain's in another zone. But I come back and I sit there with my coffee and I read over what I've written the day before, and then I start writing. And I tend to write all day until my kids come home, and then I tend to stop when they get home. Otherwise, I can't concentrate on what they need. So I have to take them to ballet and pick them up from rugby and make sure they do their homework and all those motherly sorts of things, and make sure they get fed. And then I might work again at night. But as I get closer to my deadlines, everything falls apart, and then I end up working 6-7 days a week and working sort of 15-16 hours a day to try and meet that deadline as it looms. But most of the time I try and work kind of more steadily around my family's needs.
And the washing piles up and all those things pile up. And
yes, there's nothing like the kids saying, Mum, I don't have any clean undies and or dinner's burnt or something.
the vacuum sitting in a corner gathering dust on itself. And yeah,
exactly.
Okay. All right. Now, you've done hundreds of author talks at schools.
Yes.
Can you remember what your first one was like?
Actually, my first one was wonderful because my kids were all in primary school then at the local Manly Village Primary School. And so the librarian invited me to come in and do my first author talk. And because it was in my local community, all the kids knew me, all the kids loved me. They were so excited about having a real life author who was also a mother, and my kids were so proud. So that first author talk was absolutely wonderful, and I felt so relaxed and so thrilled. However, I did have a couple of author talks after that were not quite as rosy as that. I remember one where I did a talk in a library and only 2 people showed up. So that was pretty daunting.
Oh, no.
It was awful. But anyway, but most of them have been fabulous. So I was off to a good start doing it, in my local community with all the kids that loved me.
I'm sure you get a lot more than 2 now.
Definitely.
I think someone must have just, not sent out the flyers that day or something like that.
No, I think I was definitely a very much unknown author back then. So,
what advice, Belinda, would you give to those who are finding it difficult to get published?
I think most writers find it very difficult to get published, and I think it's just incredibly hard work. It takes a long, long, long time, and I think what you need to do is you need to network. You need to make yourself part of the writing community. You need to join a writers group. You need to join up things like the New South Wales Writers Centre and the Children's Book Council and the ASA are all great organisations, and get to know other writers and really just network and take the opportunity for things like pitching to publishers at festivals. Just ask for advice from people. People are so incredibly generous with their advice, and then take it, because I find it really interesting how people will, choose not to take certain bits of advice about becoming a writer or whatever. But really, it is just incredibly hard work.
Just head down, bottom up, just keep chipping away at it.
Tenacity and determination.
All right. Now, out of all your books that you've written, do you have a favourite?
I think one of my favourite books would have to be The River Charm, mainly because it was inspired by my family history and it was so fascinating to research it. And also it was very challenging because it was my very first book where I couldn't just let my imagination run wild. I had to sort of stick to the facts. I had to weave a fictional story around true life happenings. And so it was really, really challenging and very satisfying.
All right. What or who do you like to read in your me time?
I read lots and lots and lots of things. I love sharing books with my family. So, for example, my kids and I and my husband and I have had lots of big reading marathons where we've all read, say, the Harry Potter series or the Hunger Games or the Narnia series, and then we all read a book and hand it on to the next one, and then we all talk about it around dinner. I love doing that. I've just read The Fault in Our Stars by John Green with my daughter, and then we went to see the movie, so that was really fun to kind of share that with her. Emily and I also love Jane Austen, so we both love reading Jane Austen and then sort of sometimes watching the movies after we've read the book to see how they've interpreted it. I'm also involved in a book club, so I started the book club about 14 years ago when my youngest was a little baby. We've met every 5 or 6 weeks for 14 years. We take it in turns to choose a book and cook dinner. So it's my turn this week, and so I'm having 8 of my best girlfriends round for dinner on Thursday night, and we have all been reading The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd. So I loved reading that book. So it was set in America in the middle of the 19th century, and it's about 2 sisters, which I kind of quite liked having the relationship with my sister. So it's Sarah and Angelina Grimsky, and they fought very hard for the abolition of slavery in the middle of the 19th century and also for women's rights. So they were just these incredibly strong and fascinating women, and it's all about slavery in the southern states of America. So I'm looking forward to it. So I'm cooking a special little Southern American inspired meal for Thursday night.
Oh, I was going to ask what you're cooking. Okay, that sounds good. So all right, ladies, enjoy that on Thursday night and discussing that book. That sounds really good doing that, and 14 years in the same book group.
Absolutely. So we're very close. And in that time, we've gone through everything together. We've gone through babies. We've had the odd divorce. We've had deaths in the family. We've had all these things that have happened. So we're an incredibly close group of women. And, of course, we can't help ourselves but gossip as well as talk about our kids as well as talk about the books. But we have fun doing it. And
books brought you together. How wonderful.
Yes.
Do they often do you get your books thrown in there to read, or that's...
No, actually we have read a couple of my sister's books in there, and I try and avoid them. Sometimes we talk about my books, but I don't really want to sort of, have that front and foremost in our book club. I think it's better if we read other people's books and adult books as well, mostly. So,
okay, you're listening to the Author's Shelf on 2SR 99.7 FM, Sound of the Sutherland Shire. Are you an emerging author or illustrator? Are you serious about taking that next step on your creative journey? Why not visit creativekidstales.com.au? There you can have a full author or illustrator profile, including displaying your work, networking with others. You'll also find useful tools such as a comprehensive publisher's listing, writing tips, competition information, author interviews, book reviews, and loads more. Visit the Creative Kids Tales website today. What are you waiting for? creativekidstales.com.au. For more information about today's giveaways, pop over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Author's Shelf. Belinda, what's coming up next for you?
Well, it's book week term, so lots of school visits for book week. They start at the very beginning of term and go on for about 2 months, and lots of festivals coming up. So we've got the big book day out, which is at the New South Wales Writers Centre on Sunday, August 31st. So I'm going to be there with my sister Kate. So come along and say hi, and a few festivals. So I think I'm coming to the Sutherland Festival later on in the year, and so lots and lots of things happening. Plus, I've got to write a few books. I've got 3 books to get finished by the end of the year.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining me on today's show. Now, if you'd like to find out more about Belinda, you can visit her website, Belinda Murrell, which is www.belinda, I'll spell the surname, MURRELL.com.au. And you can also follow Belinda on Facebook, facebook.com/Belinda.Murrell. That's all for this edition of The Author's Shelf. Belinda, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you so much, Georgie. That was great fun.
And on my next show, I'll be chatting with Andy Griffiths about his extraordinary career as a children's